My son's friend walked in, and everything changed. I never planned for this to happen. I never imagined that one night, wrapped in quiet and shadows, everything I knew about love, loyalty, and motherhood would be pulled apart by a moment I still struggle to name. My name is Elise. I'm 44, a single mother of one. My son Lenny, now 22, has been the center of my world since the day he was born. We've lived side by side, two people building a quiet life out of hardship and hope. No partners, no distractions. Just the two of us holding each other up when the world got too heavy. That closeness, it became the rhythm of our lives, but it was also the crack in the foundation. It was a cold night, one of those nights that seeps into your bones no matter how many blankets you pile on. Lenny came home exhausted. He looked pale, worn out from school, from work, from life. I offered him my bed, tucked him in, draped a heavy blanket over him like I had when he was a boy. He was my son, my child, That never changed. Until something did. I laid down beside him, just for comfort, I told myself. Just for warmth. That's all it was supposed to be. But then I felt his arm wrap around me. Familiar, but also not. There was a shift. A breath too close. A touch that lingered a second too long. And before I could process what was happening, the moment wrapped around us like the blanket we shared. Intimate, still, charged. I tried to rationalize it, brushing it off as instinct, as motherly affection, but my body knew better. It tensed, it froze, and then it listened to his breathing, to his heartbeat, to the silence that grew thick between us. What happened that night wasn't physical, not exactly, but it was real. It was the kind of moment that changes the air in the room forever. That makes you question the boundary between comfort and confusion. And just when I thought I had a grip on what I was feeling, the doorbell rang. It was my neighbor Mark. Innocent, helpful, observant. He stepped into our home with warmth and ease, and suddenly I could feel Lenny watching, silent, stiff, and different. It was then I realized whatever had stirred in the dark wasn't just mine to bury. It belonged to him, too. Something had shifted between us, and neither of us knew how to undo it. Mark's footsteps faded down the hallway as the front door clicked shut behind him, but the echo of his visit lingered in the room like perfume clinging to fabric. I stood there leaning against the door, heart pounding. It wasn't from Mark. It wasn't from anything he said. It was from the silence that followed, and the pair of eyes still fixed on me. Lenny hadn't moved from the hallway. His arms were crossed over his chest, but it was his gaze that struck me, focused, unwavering, almost unreadable. Something had passed between us earlier, something neither of us fully understood or acknowledged, and yet now it lived in every second of silence that stretched between us. His expression was careful neutral, like someone trying to rein in a storm from showing on his face. "You okay?" I asked, pretending my voice was steadier than it was. He nodded almost too quickly. "Yeah, just didn't expect Mark, that's all." But that wasn't all. We both knew it. I moved past him slowly, brushing my hand lightly across his arm, a reflex more than a decision. He flinched not away, just a sharp intake of breath like the touch startled something inside him. I withdrew, heart sinking a little, and walked to the kitchen, pretending to busy myself with dishes that didn't need doing. He didn't follow. Not yet. I heard him sigh before retreating to his room. The door didn't slam it closed with that kind of quiet finality that felt worse somehow. I stood over the sink, staring into nothing, trying to slow the spiral of thoughts unraveling in my head. What just happened? Why did it feel like I'd crossed some invisible line just by existing in that moment too long? I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed, the same bed that had held both of us hours earlier, the same sheets still warm with confusion. Every sound of the house creaking in the cold felt amplified. And when the wind blew hard against the windows, I imagined it whispering accusations or warnings. But by morning, the world had not ended. The sun rose coffee brewed, and life insisted we move forward. I set 2 mugs on the counter, hoping he'd take the bait. When Lenny emerged, he looked tired. More than tired, he looked like someone trying not to remember something. Coffee, I offered, voice light. Thanks, he mumbled, taking the mug without looking at me. We sat at the table, quiet the way we always did, but it was no longer the same. We were two people orbiting a memory neither of us had dared speak out loud. I thought of all the times I'd comforted him after nightmares, after school fights, after breakups, and how simple it used to be. Just love, just care, just a mother and son. But now, something had shifted. A layer of unspoken emotion hung between us like steam from the coffee we didn't drink. He finally broke the silence. So Mark's coming back today? It sounded casual, but the undertone was unmistakable. He offered to check the heater again, I said. I told him it tends to act up. Right. I waited for more. A question, a comment, anything. But Lenny just stared at his mug like the bottom of it held answers. I'm glad you're here, I said quietly, unsure why the words even left my mouth. Maybe I was reaching for something to remind us of who we were before that night. His eyes lifted slowly to mine. Me too, he said. And for a moment, that strange warmth returned, the one that both comforted and unsettled me. We held eye contact just a second too long before he blinked and looked away. That night, Mark did stop by again. He brought a small toolkit and a smile. His easy demeanor filled the room with a kind of normalcy I didn't realize I'd missed. I caught myself laughing at something he said about the broken pilot light, and it felt like breathing again. But then I saw Lenny. He was leaning against the doorway, arms folded, his gaze shadowed by something I couldn't quite name. Not jealousy exactly, but something protective, almost possessive. The way his eyes tracked Mark's every move, how he tensed when Mark knelt beside the heater close to where I stood. There was something primal in it, something that made my stomach twist. Mark didn't notice or pretended not to. He chatted easily, offered tips, said he'd be happy to help again. But I felt Lenny's stare long after Mark left. The house felt colder than before, despite the heater finally working. Do you like him? Lenny asked out of nowhere. I turned to him. Mark. He nodded, eyes locked on mine. I don't know. He's kind. Thoughtful. That's not what I asked. His tone was sharper now, edged with something unspoken. I didn't answer right away. Why are you asking me that? I finally said, almost whispering. His jaw tightened. Because I see the way you look at him. I see the way you smile when he's around. And is that a problem, I asked, more defensive than I meant to be? No, he said. Not unless you don't see the way you looked at me. My breath caught. It was the first time he'd acknowledged it. Named the thing we had both tried to ignore. Lenny. I started, but I didn't know how to finish. He stepped closer. I'm not saying it's right. I'm not saying I even understand it. But something happened. And pretending it didn't, it just makes it worse. I could feel the wall between us cracking. Do you think I wanted to feel that way? I asked, my voice trembling. Do you think I didn't spend the whole night trying to forget it? His face softened. I know. I didn't sleep either. There was pain in his voice, a kind of shared grief for something we didn't even want. We stood in the kitchen like ghosts of ourselves, haunted by a night that hadn't gone too far, but had already gone too deep. I need space, I said finally. Not because I'm angry, but because I need to remember who we are. He nodded. Me too. But as he walked away again, I felt something crack open in me. A fear that this closeness, this odd, dangerous closeness, wasn't just a passing mistake. That maybe it was something lying dormant for longer than I had admitted. The days that followed were quiet, careful. We didn't talk about that night again. We didn't sit too close on the couch. We didn't share blankets. Every gesture became deliberate, every touch calculated and avoided when it could be. But it wasn't gone. I would catch him watching me from across the room, the same intensity still flickering behind his eyes. I'd feel a twinge in my chest when he brushed past me, even without contact. And when Mark showed up a third time with groceries, "Just thought you could use a break," he said. I felt Lenny tense beside me like he was ready for battle. It was all so fragile and dangerous, and I didn't know how to fix it. One night about a week later, I found myself staring at the door to Lenny's room again, just like I had after that first night, wondering if he was awake, wondering if he was thinking about it too, wondering what would happen if I knocked. I didn't. Instead, I went to bed and cried quietly into my pillow. Not from guilt, not entirely, but from confusion, from longing, from the terrifying knowledge that love, when warped by loneliness, can become something unrecognizable. And then came the night his friend walked up the driveway. The doorbell rang. I answered it, and everything changed. It was a Friday evening. Quiet like most nights in our house had become. The tension between Lenny and me had dulled into an awkward kind of peace, unspoken, but always there like a painting you can't quite look away from. We'd found a rhythm again, but it wasn't the old one. It was restrained, cautious, marked by the memory of one night neither of us would name. Then the doorbell rang. I opened the door expecting to see Mark again. Maybe he forgot something. Maybe he was looking for an excuse. But it wasn't him. It was another young man, tall, athletic, with a crooked smile that made him instantly likable. His energy was light, almost boyish. His presence cut through the weight hanging in the air like a breeze in a stifling room. "Hi, I'm Jay," he said, offering his hand politely. "I'm a friend of Lenny's. We met at school." Something in me stiffened instinct, perhaps, or just the shock of seeing someone normal again. Someone untouched by the strange undercurrent of this house. "Of course," I replied, stepping back. "Come in?" Jay smiled, grateful. As he walked inside, his eyes scanned the place, soaking in the details the way first-time guests do. Lenny emerged from his room just a moment later. "Jay?" he asked, surprised but not displeased. "I was nearby, figured I'd drop in," Jay said, and then glanced at me. "Hope that's okay." Lenny looked at me, then back at Jay. "Yeah, of course." The two of them settled in the living room, catching up like old friends who hadn't seen each other in years, though I guessed it hadn't been that long. Their conversation was easy, sprinkled with laughter. I made myself busy in the kitchen, half listening, half pretending not to. It was the first time in weeks that I saw Lenny smile without reservation. His laugh didn't carry the edge it had when Mark was here. It was real, relaxed, unburdened. I couldn't help but watch, fascinated and strangely envious. Jay had a magnetism about him, the kind that made people lean in without realizing it. When he finally turned his attention back to me and asked about dinner plans, I was startled. "You joining us?" he asked. I wasn't planning to," I said, glancing at Lenny for direction. But Lenny didn't say anything. Jay grinned. "Come on, I don't bite." I smiled back politely and took a seat. What followed was one of the most disarming dinners I'd had in months. Jay had stories, a sharp wit, and the ability to make even silence feel interesting. He made jokes at Lenny's expense, the kind only close friends can get away with, and Lenny took it with good humor. I watched them carefully. The way they spoke, the way they looked at each other. There was history there, trust, but also something else, something subtle like tension that hadn't quite found its form yet. When Jay offered to help clear the table, I waved him off, insisting he was a guest, but he insisted harder. Before I could stop him, he was beside me at the sink, rinsing plates and talking about everything from his part-time job to a professor he hated. "You've got a great place," he said, "and you're not what I expected." I arched an eyebrow. "What does that mean?" Jay laughed. "I mean, Lenny always said he was close to his mom, but I figured you'd be, strict, reserved." "I can be," I said, "but mostly I try to be someone he can trust." He looked at me then, something unreadable flashing across his eyes. "That's rare." I nodded slowly, not sure what to say next. "I can see why he's so close to you," Jay added. There was something in his tone, something warm but heavy, and suddenly I wondered if he had noticed, if he felt the strange gravity between Lenny and me even in its silence. I pulled back slightly, drying my hands with more urgency than necessary. Lenny appeared in the doorway. "Jay, you want to play something?" he asked, motioning toward the living room where his game console sat waiting. Jay shot me a grin. "Duty calls." I watched them as they settled into the couch controllers in hand, the screen lighting up with familiar sounds of digital combat. They joked, shoved each other lightly, but beneath it I sensed the shift. Hours passed. The night grew darker. I offered to make tea and they accepted. As I returned with the mugs, I paused. Something had changed. Jay was looking at Lenny with a softness I hadn't expected. And Lenny, he wasn't backing away. It wasn't sexual, not openly, but it was intimate, and I felt like I was intruding. I placed the mugs down. Jay leaned back on the couch, stretching. "Mind if I crash here tonight?" he asked, casual. "It's a long ride back." Lenny looked at me, uncertain. "It's fine," I said. "We've got extra blankets." Lenny set up a space on the floor, but Jay kept joking about how cold it was. Then, without warning, he climbed into Lenny's bed, laughing. "I'm stealing your warmth, man." Lenny didn't object. And suddenly everything from my night with Lenny came rushing back, except now it was reversed. Now, it was him lying there in the cold, him curling closer to someone else, someone who wasn't his mother, someone his age, someone who didn't have a reason to feel guilty for being comforted. I stood outside the doorway for a long time. The lights were off, but I could hear them talking low, muffled voices, a laugh, then silence. Then one of them shifted on the mattress, then nothing. I went to bed with my heart pounding in my throat. I didn't sleep again. In the morning, Jay was already dressed. He greeted me in the kitchen, hair still tousled but smile intact. "Thanks again for letting me stay," he said. "Of course," I replied. He glanced back toward Lenny's room. "He's a good guy, you know." I nodded. Jay's eyes held mine a moment longer. "He deserves someone who understands him." I didn't respond. I couldn't. When he left, the door closed softly. Lenny didn't come out right away. When he finally did, he looked lighter, like a weight had shifted, not removed, just redistributed. I made us both breakfast, and we ate in a calm that felt honest this time. Peaceful. Not forced. So I said, "You two seem close." Lenny looked down, a smile tugging at his lips. "Yeah, we are." I waited, wondering if he'd say more. But he didn't. He didn't need to. Something had passed between them. Something I'd felt between us once and feared. But now, it wasn't mine to carry. Later that day, I found myself alone in the living room. I sat where Jay had sat. I imagined what it must have felt like to look at Lenny without the guilt, the boundaries, the shame, and I realized I was relieved. Not hurt, not jealous, relieved, because whatever had stirred in me that night, whatever fragile, misplaced affection had formed in the cold, it had never been love in the right shape. It had been loneliness disguised. And Jay had reminded me that Lenny deserved more than what I could ever give him in that space between mother and something else. The house felt different after that. Lenny smiled more. He left the room without lingering. He hugged me like a son again, not with hesitation, not with questions. And for the first time in weeks, I felt like a mother again. Time passed, and with it, the sharp edges of that unforgettable night began to soften, but they never disappeared. Some things, no matter how far you push them into the corners of your memory, still cast shadows when the light hits them just right. Lenny and I fell into a rhythm again. It wasn't the same as before, but it was functional. It was peaceful. He began spending more time out of the house, sometimes with Jay, sometimes alone. I didn't ask too many questions. I didn't need to. I could see the change in him. He moved lighter. He laughed easier, and I knew what that meant. One afternoon, I found him in the kitchen rummaging through the fridge. I was reading a book at the counter, trying to appear absorbed, though the truth was I had been studying him from the corner of my eye for the last 5 minutes. "Thinking of inviting Jay over tonight," he said casually. I nodded. "That's fine." He hesitated, then leaned against the fridge door, arms folded. Would it be weird if I said he might stay over again? There it was, the question behind the question. I looked up at him and met his gaze. "You don't have to ask my permission." "I'm not asking," he said softly. "I'm checking." There was honesty in that. Vulnerability. A boy becoming a man who still needed to know the woman who raised him could look him in the eye and say, "You are okay." You're allowed to be who you are." I offered a small smile. "Thank you for checking. You don't have to worry. You're allowed to have someone here. Someone important to you." Lenny relaxed visibly. "He is important." "I know." He looked like he wanted to say more, but instead he just nodded, grabbed a bottle of juice, and left the room. That evening, Jay came over again. This time he brought flowers, not for Lenny, not for show, but for me. A small bouquet of lilies wrapped in brown paper. "Just a thank you," he said with a shy grin. I accepted them with a quiet smile and placed them in a vase by the window. Dinner was easy, comfortable. The three of us talked, joked, and shared stories that made the house feel like a home again. Jay wasn't intrusive. He didn't dominate the conversation. But he had a way of drawing Lenny out, bringing out the version of my son I remembered, before everything got complicated. After dinner, they disappeared into Lenny's room. I busied myself with dishes, taking my time, moving slowly, savoring the quiet as much as dreading it. I knew the door would close. I knew what that meant. And I also knew that I wouldn't interrupt. At around midnight, I passed the hallway and saw the light beneath Lenny's door still glowing. I didn't stop. I didn't listen. I went to bed and stared at the ceiling, unsure if I should feel relieved or heartsick. But mostly I felt free. Free from the guilt. Free from the confusion. Free from the idea that I had to be everything for Lenny just because I had raised him alone. That night, the night had been a collision of loneliness, of vulnerability, of proximity without boundaries. It wasn't love. It was ache, and I knew that now. Still, memory is not something you can bury without consequence. One rainy afternoon weeks later, Lenny came to find me on the porch. He brought a blanket and 2 mugs of tea, mine the way I like it strong, not too sweet. He sat beside me and didn't speak for a while. Then softly, "Do you ever think about it?" I didn't need to ask what it was. I kept my eyes on the rain. "Sometimes." "Me too," he said. We let the silence hang between us for a while until he added, "I'm sorry." I turned to him. "For what?" "For putting that on you. For not understanding what I was feeling. For not stopping it." My throat tightened. "You didn't do anything to me, Lenny. We were both there. We both let it happen. But you were the adult," he said, "and there was no malice in it, just sadness. And I was the son." I nodded slowly. "You were, and I'm still your mother. But I was lonely, and I forgot what that meant for a moment." He looked down into his mug like it held answers. "Jay asked me about it once." My heart stopped. "What did you say I asked?" "That something weird happened, something we didn't know how to name. But it didn't go too far and we both pulled back." I waited. "Was that enough for him?" Lenny nodded. He just said, "You're not broken, just human." Tears welled in my eyes before I could stop them. "And do you believe that I asked barely able to speak?" Lenny didn't hesitate. "Now I do." He reached out and took my hand. A son's hand. Warm, steady, no tension, no questions, just love. That night after he went to bed, I took out a journal I hadn't written in for years. I didn't know what to write at first, but the words came like rain on a rooftop, soft, unrelenting, cleansing. "Dear self, you are not a monster. You are not broken. You are just human. And you are trying." It became my nightly ritual, a sentence a day, a confession, a prayer. As weeks turned into months, Lenny and Jay became something solid, not hidden, not forced, just real. Lenny smiled more, his body relaxed. He teased me about my book choices again and asked me to cook his childhood favorites when Jay came over. We were a family again. A different kind, but a whole one. Mark still showed up sometimes. He fixed things. He flirted lightly. But I never invited him in the same way again. I had learned my lesson about blurred lines. And me, I found myself again. Not as a woman tied to confusion, not as a mother drowning in isolation, but as Elise, a woman who had stumbled, yes, but who had also chosen the harder path. The right one. One night, I stood in the doorway to Lenny's room. The door was open and I saw him curled up beside Jay on the bed, both of them fast asleep. Jay had his arm draped across Lenny's chest. Lenny's hand rested over Jay's. It wasn't sexual. It wasn't loud. It was peace. And I smiled. Not because I was part of that moment, but because I no longer needed to be. There's something both terrifying and beautiful about realizing that you are no longer the center of someone's world. For years, I had poured everything I had into raising Lenny. Every decision, every sacrifice, every quiet moment of doubt was wrapped around the idea that my love had to be enough for both of us. I was his mother, his protector, his whole foundation. But in doing so, I had forgotten that he would someday need someone who wasn't me. That night we shared the one that almost unraveled. Everything wasn't about desire. It was about grief. The grief of two people who had leaned on each other too long, too hard, until the lines of comfort and confusion blurred. It would have been so easy to let that moment carry us further into the dark, to let silence become permission, to let loneliness masquerade as love. But we didn't. We pulled back. We breathed. We let the weight of our emotions crash over us like a wave and chose to swim instead of drown. And in that choice, we survived. Now I watch Lenny with new eyes, not as a little boy clinging to my hand in a supermarket aisle, not as a confused young man reaching for something familiar in the cold, but as someone who found his own footing. Someone who learned how to love not by holding on too tightly, but by letting go of the parts that weren't meant to stay. Jay brought light into his life. Not perfection, not a fairy tale, but something real, something honest. And for that, I will always be grateful. And as for me, I learned that love doesn't have to be all-consuming to be powerful. It can be gentle, it can be patient, and sometimes it means stepping back, even when your heart wants to reach forward. To anyone listening, to anyone who's ever felt lost inside their own home, who's ever confused silence with safety or comfort with something else entirely, know this. You are not alone in your confusion. You are not the only one who has stumbled. What matters most is what you do next. Do you bury it or do you face it? We chose to face it, and though it hurt, it healed too. If this story touched something in you, if it made you think, reflect, or even feel less alone, please consider subscribing to. We tell stories that go beyond the surface, that reach into the messy, complicated truth of who we are. Leave a comment below. Have you ever been in a moment where the line between right and wrong blurred, where you didn't know what to feel? We want to hear your story, and if this resonated with you, give this video a like. Every bit of support helps us grow, helps us keep sharing stories that matter. Thank you for staying until the end. Until next time, be kind to others, and just as importantly, be kind to yourself.